it was the first single-member district election that we had for the Oregon legislature. So the boundaries of each district were actually new during the 1972 election. And as a result of that change, there were a number of people that had retired, and some got, I guess, redistricted out. I don't remember how many of them might have been casualties of it or not. But it ends up that there were a lot of vacancies, a lot of seats that were open during the 72 election, one of which was District 53 in Klamath Falls. The District 53 in Klamath County, even though it was in eastern Oregon, it was basically an urban-suburban district. It geographically was pretty compact and pretty small. We patterned our campaign after Bob Packwood's earlier campaigns, and he had put together a campaign manual on how to get elected to the legislature. And it was kind of the Bible at the time. And people that followed that ran successful campaigns, and they may not always have gotten elected, but they ran successful campaigns. I think we set the record in 1973. We had 26 freshmen out of 60 members in the House. There were 16 Democrats and 10 Republicans who were freshmen in their first term in the House. And I think they've come close since, but I don't know that they've ever had 26. Consequently, the senior members had a responsibility to do some mentoring. In 1973, we had the McCall tax plan, which was a big issue at the time, trying to provide property tax relief for the people. And anyway, it was being pushed by Governor McCall, a Republican, and the Democratic leadership. And I was on the Revenue Committee that had the bill. And so I got a real education on tax policy and taxation, as well as a real education on the politics behind a ballot measure. Part of my learning curve was learning to appreciate that legislative process and how you drop a bill in the hopper, so to speak, but you introduce a bill and then it gets assigned to committee. It's got to pass out of committee. You've got to have a majority vote. Just because you want it to come out and just because 2 or 3 of your friends want it to come out of committee doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come out of committee. So if you are fortunate enough to get it out of committee, then you need to get the majority vote on the floor of the House or the Senate. And then when that happens, you need to get it into the right committee in the other house and get it through the committee, get it off of that floor, and then get it to the governor's desk and have the governor sign it. That's a lot of work. It's interesting to go back and think about what you learned in civics class in school. It kind of all comes together when you get into the legislature. I guess I don't want to lecture anybody, but people need to understand what the U.S. Constitution and what the Oregon Constitution say and how they structure your government, federally and statewide, and how the legislative process is supposed to work. When a bill passes one house of the legislature, that doesn't mean it's a law. And so often the press will report that such and such a bill passed the House or the Senate, and all of a sudden people that aren't so familiar with the process believe, oh, well, we've got a new law. Well, not true. It's not true until it gets passed by both houses and is signed by the governor. We had a battle cry that, the legislature is a branch of government too. There's the judicial branch, there's the executive branch, and there is the legislative branch, and we're an equal branch. Senate Bill 100 was in my opinion, a very significant piece of legislation. Not one that I personally supported, however, because of the district that I represented. But it was obviously a big, important item. I mean, you could tell because of the attention of the general public and the attention of the legislators and the executive branch of government. So I had no quarrel with whether or not it was significant or not, and maybe even needed to be passed. It was just going to have to do it without my support. 73 was a significant session for legislation that was futuristic, because at that point in time, Senate Bill 100 was. But it was in response to what was going on in the state with, development was, and some of it was in my old county, Klamath County. Some of the development was not wise. The way we were doing it was not necessarily good. So there needed to be some controls put on that. But I used it as an item to have town hall meetings when I went back home to my district. And at the time, we said, I think the message that I took back at the time was, this legislation has passed, whether we like it or not here in Klamath County, it has passed, and it's going to occur over the next few years. So get ready for the urban growth boundary fight. Well, in 1973, people didn't even necessarily understand what urban growth boundaries were. And I think that, probably Senate Bill 100 and the land use planning in Oregon has been good for the state, but it's been probably too contentious and too bureaucratic and too expensive, but the end result is probably good and is what it should be. We actually spent $722 million on tax relief that session, because we did have a huge surplus. Now, remember, it was 1979, and we didn't know that the bottom was going to fall out of the economy within a year or two. That we did not know that at the time, or we might have done something different. But at the time, in 1979, we came up with three major bills that ended up giving back $722 million in property tax relief. Some of it came back in the form of a check, and that check was to income taxpayers, not property taxpayers. But in any event, we also established the homeowner and renter property tax relief plan, the old HARP plan. We also established a number of lesser programs, one of which was the kicker. And the kicker was conceived and passed in the 1979 session and has been tested a few times since, and the people of Oregon like it. The budgeteers don't like it, and if we were to do it again today, we might very well put that money into a rainy day fund, but at that time, that was not a popular idea. The 1979 session was probably unique in another way, and that was that, you recall that I mentioned that we elected 26 Republicans. The Democrats elected 34 Democrats. But what made the session unique, besides the length of time it took us to organize, was that Hardy Myers obviously believed and wanted to show that he felt that the minority party should have more representation, should have more say in the process. And so when we negotiated the rules for the 1979 session in the House, the rules reflected that philosophy of Hardy's. And when they were adopted, we in the minority party did enjoy more say in the process. I get asked the question a lot, and I say I'd rather identify as a conservative than I would as a Republican necessarily. I'm not ashamed of being a Republican. I'm a proud Republican, and I am a rock-solid right-wing Republican. But I'm a Gary Wilhelms Republican. Any of those other candidates that were standing up there campaigning for President of the United States, I didn't find myself in line with any of them 100%. I'm my own Republican, but I am a Republican. My philosophy is fight like hell during the campaigns to get your party to victory. Once the campaigns are over and the elections are done and the people are sworn into office, you got work to do. There's honest, hard, difficult work on some very important matters for the constituents that you serve, whether it be the state legislature or Congress. And at that point, you better be working on getting the issues resolved and doing what needs to be done for the people of the state or the country, as opposed to continuing the election fight 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. That's baloney. It shouldn't be done that way. Leadership needs to be exercised to get that to change. Without leadership trying to make it happen, we probably continue along this path. One of these days it'll change. We won't continue because we're not getting the work done, and the work needs to be done. To me, it was a thrill to be able to show up and get sworn into the legislature. It was meaningful to me because it was an accomplishment. It was something that we'd worked very hard to achieve. And then at the time, I did not realize how much that was going to change our life, my family's life. That it was significant. So to me, it was a thrill, and I loved it. I loved having the vote. I loved being able to serve in the legislature.